Life is a roller coaster of highs and lows, and I just experienced a little low just right now. And the highs, those moments of triumph, are always met with joy. On the other hand, the lows are often unexpected, they are sudden, they are heartbreaking, outside of our control, and sometimes self inflicted. But regardless of how they strike, life struggles always take a heavy toll on our mental and emotional health, and not having the right survival kits can make things even worse. So hello everyone and welcome to EB Speaks. My name is Ibinabo Enebi, and I listen, in case this is your first time of joining me today and you're like, what's this channel all about? I'm going to tell you, this channel is about encouraging, motivating, and informing you. And I do this by featuring everyday people like you and me, thought leaders and experts, to share their stories and their expertise, because I believe that our stories and expertise are streetlights and survival kits that can help illuminate the path and help people that are coming behind us. So I have a series for this season that I've titled Avoiding Later Life Crisis. And the aim of this series is to share insights on how to do things better so that we don't end up with a crisis situation in future. So I've had 2 episodes under this series already, and I want you to check them out. I talked about arranging your affairs legally. I talked about getting your finances in order. And today's episode is this 3rd installment, and it's titled Dealing with Life's Pressures. And to do justice to this conversation are my special guests, Ejiro Ogbevoen, psychotherapist and founder of BlacktherapistsIreland, and Ghulam Fernandes, a grief recovery method specialist all the way from the United Kingdom. And at the end of this conversation with my guests, I hope that the conversation will provide you with emotional and mental tools necessary to help you build resilience for everyday life and for the future. So welcome, ladies.
Thank you. Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much, ladies, for taking time out of a very busy schedule. We had the initial glitches and I was a bit thrown off, but then I was like, I'm talking about building resilience for later life crises. So I have to have the emotional and the mental fortitude to be able to deal with little things, right?
Absolutely.
So before we begin with the conversation proper, I would like you to, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about yourselves, because I think that you would be able to do better justice. So Ghulam, let's start from you.
Great. Welcome, everybody. My name is Ghulam Fernandes, and I have trained as a grief recovery specialist. I'm certified by the Grief Recovery Institute. I had multiple losses growing up, and I was stuck in the pain for a long time, and I didn't really understand that actually it is possible to handle grief resourcefully. And so, having been on a long journey of healing my own grief, I trained so I could help other people to not get stuck. So I help people who are struggling with grief to learn the knowledge, tools, and processes to help them handle it resourcefully and not get stuck in the pain and therapy for years. So it's been such a privilege to come alongside people who are going through tough times. That's just a little bit about me.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I know that, part of your process is that you help people overcome grief in 90 days.
Yes, that's right. I run a 12-week program. And by the end of that program, you will have all the knowledge, tools, and processes that you need to not just to know how to process past grief, but also things that happen now and things that happen in the future. And I had no idea before I did my training that there are over 40 life events that can actually impact your heart and leave you with feelings of loss and grief. I used to think it was just about people who die, but actually whenever something comes to an end, or there's a change in a familiar pattern of behavior, that impacts our heart and it can leave us with conflicted feelings. Sometimes the change might even be a positive thing, but that transition can lead to conflicted feelings, which unless we process them, it just becomes another thing in your backpack that you're carrying through life.
Oh, thank you so much, Ghulam, for that. And, listen, I like it when you said that about over 40 life incidences, it's a word like that, that impacts our hearts. And that's very nice. Because I remember when I lost one of my dogs, I was very sad. And now I know that I was valid. And Ejiro, please, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So my name is Ejiro Ogbevoen, and I am a psychotherapist. I trained here in Ireland. I am accredited with the Irish Association of Counselors and Psychotherapists. And my journey towards psychotherapy, I can say, started a long while ago out of curiosity for myself. I've always felt like I didn't fit in. And my journey was spiritual, teachings, learning, trying to figure out life. And I think it has brought me to a place where taking psychotherapy training helped me support myself. And therefore, I am available to support other people who feel a little lost, trying to understand life and themselves. Wow. In 2020, when the whole incident with Judge Floyd, a lot of people in Ireland started looking for Black therapists, and it was difficult for them to find one. And that was how I started BlacktherapistsIreland, almost 2 years now. And it has been a gift, a blessing to myself, to other therapists, and to the people who have used the service. So, yeah.
Fantastic, Ejiro. Thank you so much. I mean, you took the question out of my mouth. I wanted to ask you why Black Therapist Company. But again, it's funny because, you mentioned, you talked about George Floyd, but, generally speaking, Black people say, oh, Black people don't need therapy. So when you have the Black Therapist Ireland, I'm wondering, do Black people really need therapy? Now, Ghulam, I'm sorry, I didn't need to go this way, but I just needed to know because we normally say, Black people, we don't need therapy, we're fine. Yeah. And there you are, setting up the Black Therapist Ireland.
Yeah, I mean, listen, after taking the training, and like I said, my journey has been a long journey that brought me to therapy. And the way I can only explain the way that makes sense for me, and I hope people really hear this when they say Black people don't need therapy, is like you have 3 or 4 main organs in your body. And if you want to look at it as your spirit, your body, your soul, your mind, and you say, well, I would just focus on the spirit will take care of everything. I don't need to bother too much about the body. So yes, we are very spiritual people. We can find comfort, but there's another aspect to us. Our liver is not doing the same thing as our heart. So you can't say the liver is not important just because it's not doing what the heart is doing. So we as people need support with our mental health, and counseling is only one aspect of it. And it's so beneficial. I love it. Every time I work with a Black person, I just want to hug them and say, just go tell one other person that this works. And it's a myth, it's a lie that counseling, like Black people don't need counseling. It's not true.
Fantastic, Ejiro. Ejiro, you know what? I love the way you said this. You talked about, we're very spiritual. In our way of thinking, a prayer can fix anything. You have a mosquito bite, it's a demonic mosquito. And this is not to say that, listen, I believe so much in prayer and I believe in the power of the spiritual. But I also think that, like you said, that the liver doesn't do the same thing with the heart. Because, the way Ghulam said, there are over 40 life experiences that can impact on the heart, and more so on the liver as well. That kind of way, because sometimes, the body responds to the way that we respond to pain. So I really like that you've said it, that that Black people do need therapy, because it would be unfair then of us and of our bodies not to have that kind of treatment that it requires. So thank you very much. And listen, Ejiro and Ghulam, I think we're going to do more with this conversation. And listen, I'm very excited about it. So thank you. Now, I want to start the process with this simple question: that what are the most common life experiences that trigger emotional and mental health? And I'll start with you, Ghulam.
So in terms of grief, we say that when something comes to an end, or there's a change in a familiar pattern of behavior, then that can actually trigger those feelings. So that could be to do with your work or career. You might change role, or you might change job, or you might be made redundant, or you might retire. It might be to do with your health. Maybe you've lost a limb, or you've lost the capability of doing certain things. It might be to do with relationships. Maybe there's been a romantic breakup, or there's been a divorce, or somebody has died, or even just moving away. You're not able to access the relationships that you had. And it can be also things to do with your hopes, dreams, and expectations. So I remember somebody I spoke to, all she ever wanted was to be a wife and mother. And that was her dream, really, to have a happy family. So when her relationship broke down and she got divorced, that was the end of those dreams and hopes and expectations that she had. So there are many, many things where something has come to an end, or there's a change in a familiar pattern of behavior. And surprisingly, it can even be something that you actually want. Before I did the training, I hadn't realized that I was working for a large church on one site, and I realized I wanted to be closer to home so I could invest more time and energy in the community I lived in. So I asked if I could transfer to the site that was closer, and they jiggled things around and, to please me, made it happen. But I really struggled to settle in, and I was thinking, why am I not feeling more excited? Because this is something that I wanted. But I realized that actually there were conflicting feelings going on. I had built a lot of relationships where I was. I had a lot of autonomy in the role that I had. And so I hadn't realized, actually, I need to be able to grieve and let go before I can hold on to the new thing. So any situation where there's been a change in the familiar pattern of behavior, or something has come to an end, is likely to end up giving us conflicting feelings. Grief is actually the normal and natural reaction to loss. But so when we're grieving, we're not actually broken. We don't need to be analyzed or fixed or judged. What we do need is to be listened to with respect and dignity. But sometimes when we don't understand what grief is or how it's impacting us, or we've got other misinformation, which is kind of getting us stuck, we can, if we're not careful, we can end up being stuck for years. So when my mum died, when I was age 13, somebody trying to be helpful, I remember they leant forward and they said, "Oh, you mustn't cry. Oh, don't cry. You mustn't cry. You've got to be strong for your brothers and sisters." Now that sounds like common sense sort of advice, and I believed it. I took it on, and then I tried to live my life like that. And for years, and I really mean years, from age 13 till about age 30, I was being strong. I was getting on with life, not realizing that grief is not only negative, it's accumulative. And it will, if there are unresolved issues, they will sit there waiting to be dealt with and processed and completed. And unless you do that, sooner or later, they'll come and bite you. So when I got to about 30 and my older brother died very suddenly from a massive heart attack, not only did I have to deal with that grief, but all the unresolved grief from my mum also came up. And so I had like a double whammy, which really shook my world up. So it's really important to have an understanding of what grief is, how it affects us, recognize the symptoms and so on, so that we can deal with it resourcefully and not allow it to be kind of something we push into our backpack and then can't try and, push on through life, but it gets heavier and heavier. And every time a new event happens, that goes in there. And actually then it can just take something very small to just send us over the edge. So the first thing I think that's really important is to understand the meanings of words, understand what is grief, what is unresolved grief, and how do we recognize the symptoms, what are likely to be the causes. Those sorts of things can be a really good starting point, because when we know better, we're able to do better. It'll be helpful. So the first step is to understand what is grief and understand how it can impact us. So for me, to help me remember, I think of the P's. So we can be in pain, emotional pain. We can lose our sense of peace. Everything becomes very uncertain. We can feel anxious. It can impact our productivity. So if you're grieving and you've got conflicted feelings, sometimes you can struggle to focus, struggle to make decisions. It can affect your memory. You can become forgetful about the things that you need to do or how you need to do things. And everything just feels like a lot more of an effort. You can also lose your sense of passion for life. Things that you used to love to do suddenly seem to have no meaning. And you can even be struggling to just get out of bed and engage with people. Sometimes people, as a way of coping, will start to withdraw and think that they don't want to bother other people and start kind of grieving alone. The other thing that for me, I noticed it had a big impact, and it does for many, is if you had a clear sense of purpose, you can suddenly get disconnected from that, because you find yourself almost wondering, well, what's the point? I'm just going to die anyway. Why bother doing this, that, and the other? And I think it can also trigger off all sorts of other things, depending on how the loss happened, what your part was, whether you did your best or whether you had a chance to say goodbye, and all those sorts of things. But for me, I remember sort of just feeling lost and empty, and at times even hopeless, because, what seemed to be my worldview, because I think I grew up thinking that old people die and other people die. And suddenly my mum had died, and then my brother had died. And then I went on to have several more losses. But that worldview was suddenly shattered. And then I was struggling and searching to try and make sense of that. And one of the impacts it had for me was I became very afraid of death and dying. And I would start having lots of nightmares. And so people can be impacted by their losses in different ways.
Fantastic, Ghulam. Listen, I know that we have so much to talk about. I just want to give Ejiro some time. Listen, but there's something that you said that really touched me, or that resonated with me. And you said that grief is not only negative, but also accumulative, and that if we didn't deal with it, then it came back to bite us. Ejiro, again, I want to ask you this question. Ghulam had looked at the most common life experiences through the lenses of grief. And so I want us to look at it through the lenses of the mental upset.
Thank you, Ibinabo, for that. I want to say anything can trigger upset. It doesn't have to be big or small. It doesn't have to be big. It could be small. And we as humans, we're meaning-seeking beings. We make sense of things that are happening, or we attempt to make sense of things that are happening to us. And so the meaning we give to things is really what causes us to either be distressed or be able to cope. So if my boss looks me sideways and I have this impression that my boss doesn't like me, that's going to bother me. It's not a big deal. It's not a big thing, but to me, it's significant. And if I don't address that as something that is upsetting me, then it would lead into other things. For many of us, we take stress as part of life, like it happens. And yes, there is a level to it. But many things that we put or we give meaning to that aren't supportive to ourselves help us make situations worse than it needs to be. So there are big life events, but there are also all these big events, many people also go through them without as much distress. So there's something about going through big things and being able to cope with it, and then going through big things and not being able to cope with it, because how we see it impacts how we respond to what's happening.
Oh my gosh, Ejiro, thank you so much for that. And I want to say this, right? So somebody giving you a side eye, can actually
be upsetting,
trigger something mentally. Now, there's something I also want to ask you. And the question just popped into my head. Now, I have two specialists. One deals with emotional health and one deals with the mental health. And quickly, what's the difference between the emotional health and the mental health? Because somebody may say, well, it's the same. Are they the same? Are they different? If they are, how different are they?
Well, I think it depends on who you're asking. Personally, I feel it is the same, because your thoughts, how you feel, and the action or the behavior that comes out of this are the three key things that sustains our inner well-being. So you could focus on the thoughts, you could focus on the feelings, or you could focus on the behavior. But irrespective of where you focus, we're still talking about our mental health and our well-being. So when you say emotional specialist, I would perceive or think that maybe this person is really focused on the emotional aspect of mental health, but there's thoughts, there's behavior. And that's why there's so many ways of dealing with mental health through these angles, and so many practices and theories come in at different angles, but at the end of the day, it is mental health.
Now, Ejiro, thank you so much for that. And I suppose then that Ghulam, that Ejiro has answered the question. Yeah.
So I'm reminded of the fact that when you're renovating a house, you have different tools for different jobs. So if you've got, imagine you want to paint a room, but what you've got is a saw, a hammer, and a screwdriver. So because of the tools that you've got, you're not going to be able, I mean, they're really good tools and they're really going to be able to do the right job in the right way. But for some jobs, like painting your room, they're not going to be the right tools. So what I've learned through the grief recovery method is that for grief specifically, there are tools that are more helpful. And so sometimes people don't understand what unresolved grief is. And if you don't understand what causes unresolved grief, then it's hard to deal with it. So obviously, Ejiro's got a lot of experience in, dealing with all sorts of aspects. I'm focusing in on particularly what's helpful when it comes to grief. And so I would just share that there are three specific aspects of grief, which is really helpful to be aware of. So the first one is where whatever the situation is, whether it's small or big, where you're left wishing that you had done things differently, or you had done them better, or you had done more of something. So where you end up with internal conflict because you're thinking, oh, I wish I'd said this, I wish I'd done that, I wish I hadn't done this, So any situation where you're left wishing it had been different or better, or you'd done more of something, that can be one aspect of unresolved grief. That's a sign that there's some unresolved grief. Another aspect is where there's been a loss of hopes, dreams, and expectations as a result of the end of or the change. And then the third aspect is really where you've got undelivered communication of an emotional nature. For whatever reason, you never got to say the thing that you wanted to say, and you're still carrying that burden. So when my mum was about to go off on holiday, I suddenly had this urge to tell her that I loved her and give her a hug. But there were lots of people milling around who'd come to say bye from the street. And I remember this logical part of me popped up and said, oh, don't make a fuss. She'll be back in 6 weeks. So I listened to that logical part instead of my heart. And I didn't say anything. Oh, she'll be back in 6 weeks. And obviously, while she was away, she took ill and she died. So for years, I was stuck in the pain of carrying that undelivered communication. And so that's an example, where you can get stuck because you've got something you wish you'd said and then you didn't say. Whereas when sometimes it's helpful to illustrate these three options, where when my sister, she had a delayed grief reaction after my brother's death, and she took her own life. It was very sad because she was almost 21. And in that grief situation, I was left with a lot of what ifs. I was left with a lot of, if only I'd done this, or if only I'd done that, if only I'd said this, if only that. So I remember hearing the news, because I was struggling. In order to cope and try and make sense of life, I gave up my job and I went traveling to India. Then I got a message saying, and she became ill just before I left, but then she seemed to be better. So we had this whole discussion of, should I cancel my trip? Should I take her with me? And she persuaded me to go. And then when I was in India, I got a message saying, oh, she's had a relapse, you better come back. Because we had a good relationship, I felt much better. I was going to try and support her. Then I tried to phone her from Mumbai to say, look, hang in there, I'm coming back. And again, I couldn't get through. In those days, it was impossible getting through. So this logical part of me popped and said, oh, you'll see her tomorrow. Can't get through, don't worry about it. But between me leaving Mumbai and landing, she sadly died. So I had a lot of that, that aspect of grief. What if only I'd made sure I talked to her, and so on. The third aspect about a loss of hopes, dreams, and expectations was particularly prevalent when I had a miscarriage. I've got 2 wonderful sons, and I love my husband very much, but I often felt outnumbered because 3 guys to me. So when I was pregnant and I found out it was going to be a little girl, I had all these little fantasies about how, we'd have mother and daughter time and we'd go shopping and all that stuff. So when I had the miscarriage, obviously all those dreams and hopes and expectations and came to an end. And that was what the unresolved grief was about. So I think for everybody, it's really helpful to understand what is unresolved grief and then how it might impact you and how you might need to deal with it.
Fantastic. Listen, I'm just taking so many notes. And Ghulam, you know why this conversation is very important? It's important because, that sometimes when you feel something, you do not have the right words to explain it, right? And you have just said 2 things that resonates with me, that sometimes you may feel grief, not because somebody died, but because of a loss of hope, dreams, and expectations. And also, you could be stuck in the pain of undelivered communication. Today, my family had the 3-year remembrance of my mother-in-law, and I had the pain of an undelivered communication because I didn't get to talk to her. Almost 17 years ago, I didn't talk to my dad, and I wish that I did, and I had that pain in my heart. But then, if I didn't hear you say this, I couldn't word my feelings right. I would have been, I didn't have the right expressions to pinpoint that this is what I'm going through, and this is the word for it, and I'm actually grieving at something that I was supposed to do. So thank you very much for that explanation. And thank you so much, Ejiro, for bringing to light, the differences between the 2, professions, so to speak. Now, the next question I'm going to ask you is, what are the most visible signs that indicate that someone is going through mental and emotional pressure? So, Ghulam, I'll start with you.
I think, as I mentioned, the P's, if you start noticing that somebody seems to be becoming more forgetful, they're struggling to make simple decisions, that there's a change in their behavior in terms of they get angry very quickly, seem very short-tempered. Other visible signs can be changes in their pattern of eating or sleeping. Maybe they start to do things that they wouldn't normally, that are not helpful, like smoking or drinking or gambling, or because sometimes people try to find ways to cope and distract themselves from the pain of what's going on. And those things in themselves can cause other problems, but they may not even be aware of why they're doing that. You know, why are they binge watching hours and hours of Netflix movies? In my case, when I was going through a period of stress, I didn't realize actually that's what and this was before I'd done the course. I found myself binge watching Korean dramas, and I was like, my children are going, "Mum, what's going on? It's not like you. Why would you want to watch Korean drama?" But it was kind of my way of escaping. And so sometimes people try all sorts of different things, but they're only short-term relief because the true cause of your pain is left undealt with. But if you notice that somebody's struggling to even just get through daily stuff, and they've lost their sense of humor, everything seems too much of an effort, those are signs. Sometimes people put on a very brave front, like with my sister. And if you're not aware of how to see beyond that, which we weren't because we were all struggling with our own grief, you can miss those signs. But if they're not at peace, if they appear to be in pain, if their productivity has gone downhill, they don't feel any kind of passion for life, purpose, those are all signs from my perspective. Ejiro,
fantastic.
Yeah.
Your productivity have all gone downhill. Listen, Ghulam, I love the way you use your words. I love the way you use the trees and the twos. It's so poetic. I could listen to you all day. And Ejiro?
Ghulam has said almost everything. And I think awareness of self really helps. And I know when we're stressed, that goes out the door. But if you understand yourself and you begin to notice things that are different, then for you, something is going on. You know, you realize that you're more fearful. And for some of us, it might show up like I'm being more prayerful, but the reality is it is fear-driven. And that is saying something is not right. You're sleeping and sleeping too much or sleeping too little, eating too much or eating too little. You cry at the drop of a hat. And I'm not talking about just watching a sad movie and crying. You just find yourself crying when you shouldn't, or something small. You close the fridge and the fridge didn't close properly and you just burst into tears. You know, things like this will tell you something isn't quite right, and pay attention. Everything that we're experiencing is a signal. And like Ghulam said, we're trying different ways to cope. And sometimes these methods are working against us or really highlighting to us that something is not right. You know, if I love going for a walk and suddenly I'm going for 12K walks, and if I don't go for a 12K walk, then I don't feel okay myself. That just means, you know, if your life is being impacted by whatever it is that you're doing, then there's a problem.
Okay, now thank you very much. Now I want to ask another question that just popped into my mind. What if you begin to overwork?
Yeah, so if you're overworking, that, like we all know, that is a sign. You're trying to avoid something by throwing yourself into work. And of course, your family begins to suffer. Your health begins to suffer. That's what I mean by, yes, something may look like it's a good thing or it makes sense, but you're using it as a coping mechanism. And that is you're running away from the real issue, whatever that is for you. You're not dealing with it in a way that supports you, that helps you move towards what you're trying to do. Because working longer hours, like that word Ghulam used, it is cumulative. So today you're working 12 hours. Tomorrow you're going to work 14. Very soon you'll be working 24 hours. And there's no way you can sustain that. So then there's trouble.
Thank you. Now, what about the most unobvious indicators? Because we've talked about the very obvious indicators. I saw this thing on Instagram where, was it on Instagram or TikTok, where a lady was dancing. That was her last video. And after that, she took her own life. So, you know, people will become people. She was dancing and she was very happy and she ended her life. So I'm saying that to ask this question then, that what are one of the most obvious indicators that that show that someone is pressured? Because you didn't say anything about being excited or being very humorous as part of a red flag.
Well, and that's why I talk about knowing yourself. And it's difficult sometimes to know for somebody else. But even in observing somebody else, if you have been down for the past 3 weeks and suddenly there's a change, I need to be aware of that. Like, if there's no reason for it, like we need to be asking questions. And yes, for many of us, because we mask anyway, in the day to day, many of us are hiding behind a mask, so we don't really show ourselves. So when crises do happen, we go even further into the hiding. So then we have this extra flamboyant person because you have gone further in because you're trying to cope. So when you say unobvious, not so obvious, I think maybe because we would not classify being happy as a problem, then we might say it's not obvious. But if you look deep, the happiness just feels, the energy feels different. The strength of the energy will be probably so heightened and the person cannot calm down. You know, there's just this drive. It just doesn't feel even
animated.
Exactly. It's so strong. Or your person could be smiling and you can tell that there's pain behind the person's eyes. And then what you're seeing is this big fat smile, which doesn't match what you are sensing when you're standing next to the person. So yeah, it's down to awareness and listening to ourselves, really.
Fantastic.
That's very important, not only to be aware of yourself, but aware of the people who are around you. And we were so caught up with ourselves, we were not really aware or understanding what was happening for my sister, that she was actually having a delayed grief reaction. And in the grief recovery method, we talk about an award-winning recovery performance. And what that means is that sometimes we put on this thing, we think we've got to act strong, and we do such a good performance that actually you could get an Academy Award for it. And I never really understood what they meant by that until one day I met somebody who I knew was in a lot of pain, and we were going through the program together. But in that particular context, it was like she's like the life and soul of the party. And so I think I said to her, "How was your doctor's visit?" She said, "Oh yeah, it was fine. They seemed to suggest it was stress." Me? Stressed? She's talking to the group like this. And I'm thinking, wow, that's a really good example of an Academy Award recovery
performance.
Yes. And if I hadn't, it's about relationships, isn't it? That when we have a real relationship with somebody, they're able to trust us to open up about what's really going on. And so then you're trying to match what you know is going on with what is being presented, and that needs to ring alarm bells, really.
So now the next question I'd like to ask you is, I want to give you a case study of something that happened recently. 6 days ago, a popular Nigerian actress died. And she had the backstory of a catalog of horrific losses. 8 members of her immediate family passed away, including 6 siblings, 3 brothers and 3 sisters, her father, and then her only child. And that child was 30 years old. She had her when she was 14. So she's practically had her all her life. And so she shared her pain and her mental challenges and mental health challenges openly on social media. But just before her passing, she shared on her Instagram that she was slammed with a lawsuit for not being able to fulfill a contractual agreement or obligation due to mental issues. And unfortunately, she died just 6 days ago. And social media and Nigerians are very saddened by it. I'm particularly saddened by it because I watched her just a few weeks, on live television talking about, her loss and all thing. And she appeared to look okay. She gave very sound advice, but then just seeing her die, just hurt my feelings. But then the most tragic of the situation now is that she is survived by her mother, whose life has been, torn apart by this tragedy. And so she has died. She's been through the loss. She's dead. But we have a mother now who has lost 6 or 7 children, a grandchild, and a husband. So listen, I don't know, because this is a classic horror movie. Mm-hmm. Now, I want us to dissect the situation. And I'm going to ask you this question. How can this mother cope? Number one, how can she build mental and emotional resilience to withstand this blow? And what are those tools that she needs? And how can people around her help her to cope? Ghulam, I'll start with you.
The first thing I would like to say is that we're talking about very difficult situations. So if you're watching and finding yourself feeling triggered in any way, you need to make sure you're taking care of yourself. You're reaching out for support if you need it. And also, I'm sharing quite a lot about the losses that have impacted me, but I really want viewers to know that I'm coming from a place of surviving and victory, and now wanting to be a beacon of hope to others. There were times on that journey where it was really hard to imagine that life could ever have any joy or peace or love. And, there was just such a lot of emotions and grief and so on. So really, I want to be seen more as a testimony of how it is possible to get through these things. So that was just the first thing I wanted to say, that if you find yourself feeling emotional because it's bringing up stuff about your own losses, then please do reach out, message Ibi, or, there are lots of other resources available. But it's really important that you take care of yourself. But more than that, that you get hope from what we're sharing. Ejiro and I are sharing that there is hope, that there is light at the end of the tunnel. So in terms of this particular lady, obviously we don't have the details of exactly what her situation is, but certainly if a client came to me in that sort of situation, the first thing I would want to do is really just to spend time listening to find out what are the unresolved, what each of those losses will have had its own impact and brought different things. And depending on how it ended, whether she had a chance to say goodbye, depending on how much emotional resilience she already had, it's a bit like having a good bank account, isn't it? That there's an unexpected bill, but there's plenty of money there, so you don't go into the red. And in the same way, I think on an ongoing basis, we need to be checking what is our emotional resilience bank account like? How much are we depositing and how much are we investing in ourselves? And some cultures more than others, we can have a tendency to think that doing anything for ourselves is selfish, that we're here to serve and we should be looking after other people, that we should be giving to other people. And that can sometimes mean that my clients come really weary, empty, and really, at the end of their tether. So some of my initial advice would be to start helping them to prioritize self-care. And I would remind them, look, if you had broken your leg or something, you wouldn't expect to carry on doing all the things that you normally do. And so sadly, there are some myths around that people kind of get into. And instead of thinking, okay, I'm going through a really difficult time, what can I delete from my diary? What can I delay, or what can I delegate? So that I've got the space and the time to actually to take care of myself. And I'll often also encourage people to remember that what has happened is really, really sad, but it's just one part of their life. Because sometimes, we've had the loss, whatever that loss is, but actually 95% of our life is actually carrying on fine. We're doing well with our career, our marriage is doing well, or our children are doing well. So sometimes we have to kind of get the right perspective. And one of the things I really like about the grief recovery method is that we have a tool where you actually graph all the different losses that have impacted you so that you can prioritize and work on them one at a time. So whether you've had one loss or you've had 10 losses, once you've got the knowledge, tools, and processes, you can work on each loss, starting with the one that's most impacting you or is causing you the most emotional pain. But building up your emotional bank account, I encourage people to put together what I call an emotional first aid kit. And in there, I encourage people to think about all the different things that feed their senses and that lift their spirit. So for me, I know that smelling roses, actually, however I'm feeling, it just lifts me up. So I got myself some hand cream, and when I'm feeling stressed or a bit overwhelmed, I'll massage it into my hands and I'll smell it. And immediately I can feel myself feeling more resourceful. For some people, there are activities that really help just to shift their emotions and help them to get perspective. So each person needs to be self-aware of what is it that makes a difference for them. For some people, it's dancing or singing or walking or doing their craft or watching certain things on babies doing funny things on YouTube. But I say to people, look, have a kit. So when you find yourself feeling a bit overwhelmed with your emotions, it reminds you that there are other things you can do to regain your state of resourcefulness so you can come back to the issue and deal with it in a more resourceful way. But certainly if you've got such overwhelming loss, you are looking at prioritizing what you work on, making sure that you have got the right knowledge, tools, and processes, and particularly being aware of the misinformation. Like with me, somebody saying, oh, you've got to be strong for your brothers and sisters. You've got to be aware of the misinformation that can keep you stuck, but build up your emotional bank account, because each person is unique. Each person's journey is unique. And so nobody else can do that for you. Only you can try different things and notice what helps. So those are a few tips that sometimes you can get so focused on the past, helping them to focus on, well, what's really happening right now can be really helpful. So there are many tips. And if people want more information about putting together their emotional self-care kit, then, feel free to just keep their details. We can send out some information.
Good, and we've talked about building the emotional kits. We don't have those kits, and that's why we're here. So we're going to talk about those kits. But Ejiro, what's your contribution towards
Ghulam has said a lot. And the most important thing is that as much as we have all this information about this lady, we don't have the necessary information to begin working with her. Because how is she feeling? What meaning is she giving to what is going on for her? What is her bank account of resources is? What all of that are? We can't really delve into it. However, I'm just going to point maybe to a few things that may be supportive to help us locate ourselves if anything close to what this woman is going to happen to us. So when we, like I said earlier, our thoughts or our thinking, how we feel and what we do are really three things that are important to our sense of well-being. And there's something that we do with our thoughts, especially around when something happens in crisis or in general. The three things that we do: we try to justify, we try to rationalize, and we try to defend something. And this keeps us in a cycle that keeps us trapped. So rationalizing, you keep asking, but why? I mean, like, if this woman is asking why, like, who on earth has the answer to that why? And you could really get trapped in that why. And so because our mind is designed to make sense, to make meaning out of it. So rationalizing is something that we do, but we have to be mindful in crisis because we can get stuck in that cycle. It's hurting us, but we feel like somehow if I think a little bit more, I would have an answer. Or we're defending something that happened. You know, something happened, or like this woman, we're trying to find out who is wrong or what could have gone wrong. And then we're trying to really find a place to stand regarding what has just happened, or we're justifying it. You know, that's another thing that we struggle with. We want to make sense we want things to be right or wrong. And sometimes there's no blame, there's no victim, not victim, there's no villain.
There's no answer.
Yeah, there's no villain to this story. There's nobody to go to, but there's something inside us that keeps driving for this. So being able to watch that, and I would say stepping away, and that's why mindfulness is a very important way for us to support ourselves during difficult times. Because your mind can get caught up in this cycle, mindfulness helps you ground yourself. And one of the ways that we can look at mindfulness is taking yourself out of your mind, be it future, past, wherever, in any cycle, and our body is a good way for us to come. What is happening here? No matter where you are in this world, you have your body with you. Now, locate yourself in your body. What are you seeing? What are you smelling? What do you feel? What is the temperature of the room? I love what Ghulam said about noticing what helps lift you. And for her, even a rubbing hand cream that smells like roses, that's her body. She's using everything she has to support herself. Because sometimes we cannot go looking for things. We need to have what's available to us, and your body is available to you. Your breath, being able to slow down your breathing, or notice how that is going on. In times of crisis, our breathing gets really shallow. We're trying to survive. Things are not going well. But paying attention to these things, just look for ways to support yourself. So self-care, very important. And that's why I say, come to your body. And from there, make decisions on the things you want to do, which is the third part. Is it helping me? Is sleeping too much hurting me? Like you sleep to a point that your body begins to ache and cry for help. Maybe that is the time for you to go take a bath or go for a walk or call a friend. But listening to yourself and working with yourself to support yourself through the crisis. And no matter what, I want us to hear this. As difficult as any situation is, you're passing through. It's going to take a while. And for each of us, that while could be 10 years, 1 year, 1 month, but you're passing through. And you want to support yourself to pass through. Just like if you had a physical injury, if you cut yourself now, without doing anything, your body will try to heal. But if you keep going there and keep opening it and be like, is it healing? Is it healing? Then you're constantly poking at this injury. So when we get ourselves into a crisis, emotional crisis, or a difficulty that big, know that you're trying to get well. So put things in place to support yourself in this journey towards health.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I can hear you.
You're welcome, Ibinabo.
Well, listen, I hear you. I hear everything you're saying. I hear everything you're saying, but I'm putting myself in my shoes of when I lost my father and I lost my mother. and I lost my adopted son. And the reality is, and of course, because I lost my mother-in-law as well, but the reality is that the person is not going to come back. There's a shift, you know. So for example, I was home and I went to my children's room, and the room has changed. The texture, the feeling has changed. My mother-in-law is no longer alive. Even going to my hometown as well, where my parents are, it's not the same. There's a shift. And, you know, sometimes, you know, our lives are interwoven of these shared memories and laughters and experiences. And you could just sit down, you're in the living space, for example, and the person is no longer there. The chair is empty. Or if the woman lost 7 or 8 children, they're not there anymore. You don't have, you know, those moments where you would laugh and smile. And sometimes the losses just simply mean that you're childless. The memories are no longer there. So I don't know how somebody can overcome that kind of, and I hear you.
Yeah, but you
this
see,
is just me asking.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of being a human. Your system itself is trying to support you. Like you won't remember a lot of things in the situation of, like, the body, your mind is working together to survive. So yes, and somebody that's looking in might say, oh my God, or you that is experiencing it, you might just be feeling the absence of it, but it's not like overwhelming. You're not, well, it is overwhelming in a sense, but you're not taking in more than you can take in. You are being dealt what you can take, and if it's too much, your system will shut down. There are people that just flop into this sense of helplessness. All of that is your system trying to cope with what's going on. You are there designed to support yourself. I don't know if Ghulam has anything to add to that.
Yeah, sorry about the phone. It suddenly went off. So there are a couple of things here. We're talking about short term of managing our emotions so that we're resourceful enough to work through. I'm talking about grief specifically, that we're resourceful enough then to start doing the work of discovering and identifying what particularly is the source of your pain, and then giving you the knowledge, tools, and processes to be able to work through that one by one. So I've had different clients who've come either sometimes with multiple losses in a short period of time, or it might be a loss that happened a long time ago, but they just haven't been able to come to terms with it. So in terms of this lady, the first thing I would say is if she's really struggling, she needs to find an appropriate person who can actually support her to work through what are the particular things that are causing an upset. Now, it's hard when we hear somebody else's story to imagine how on earth would we cope, but we don't know the details of what happened, what she made it mean, how it impacted her. And as I said, usually it's with every kind of loss like that, it's figuring out, is it I'm wishing that I'd done things better or differently or more, or is it I'm carrying something really important and I have so many regrets that I didn't say it, or is it a loss of hopes, dreams, and expectations? So I would help the person to work through those things one thing at a time. But before that, sometimes people are in such a general state of unresourcefulness that we would work on that first. And I've developed an acronym. It's about our mindset. You know, when we come to a situation, we can have different kinds of mindsets. So one mindset, as Ejiro said, was that you can be in blame frame. So you're looking to fix the blame, like what happened, why did it happen, where did it happen, who was involved, who did this. You can ask all those kind of questions and not actually, you'll understand what happened, you'll have fixed the blame and everything, but it won't fix the situation. So I encourage people to focus more on outcomes. So that lady, I would encourage you to think, okay, all that has happened and we can't change what has happened. But what we can have an impact on, and what we can control, is how are we going to respond? And so by asking ourselves better quality questions, that can be really helpful. So asking, so if I was in that situation and I asked myself, where can I get support? What help do I need? How do I want to create a legacy for the people that I've lost? How can I live my life so it honors the memory of them? How can I create something good out of what has been really difficult situations? So the quality of the questions we ask ourselves will take us in different directions. So blame frame versus outcome frame is really important. And Ejiro has already mentioned about the awareness, self-awareness of what drains me, what nurtures me, what builds me up, what lifts me up. And then getting the skills and tools to manage our state. Ejiro has mentioned about breathing, about mindfulness, about how we use our body, about what we feed ourselves. And I think another really important thing is recognizing that each person is an individual and how they will handle things will be very different than other people. And this idea of building yourself a care kit, so at the times when you're feeling low, you haven't got to think, what can I do? You've already gathered your resources. And that reminds you, okay, go for a walk, go and drink some water, make sure you're getting enough sleep, take care of those basics so that it gives you the capacity to deal with all the other stuff. And obviously making sure that you build yourself a support network. But a lot of that comes down to the quality of the questions you ask yourself.
Yeah.
So you can either be feeling really, really overwhelmed, or you can say, okay, what's one thing I can do today that will give me a better tomorrow? Or who can I get support from? What resources do I have? So learning to focus on outcomes, because we can't change what's happened. What do we want to happen going forward? And then asking ourselves good quality questions so it gets us focused.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you so much, Ghulam. I didn't want to cut you short because I'm just aware of time. The two things that I've learned from both of you is this. Ejiro, you said that that our minds want to take care of us, and that sometimes that life doesn't deal us a blow that we can cope.
Well, your system is going to adapt to support you in the blow. So it's not life is life happens, but you are designed to support yourself with knowledge and awareness. But you know, even the person who decides to sleep 3 weeks straight, the system, as best as they know how, is saying, listen, right now, you can't cope with the light, you can't cope with the sun, you can't cope with the people around you, just stay in bed. So there's something inherent in us that wants us to survive. That's what I mean by you will find ways. Sometimes they may not be helpful, but instinctively, you're looking to cope, to survive.
Thank you for that. And Ghulam, I love what you said, that we should move from the blame frame to the outcome frame. Now, I want to ask the next question. What are some of the most common misconceptions or myths about grief and mental health recovery?
So
first.
Sorry. So in terms of the grief side of things, we say that there are 6 very common myths. So one of them I mentioned earlier about, be strong. So I often use the acronym BRATS because I see them like naughty myths. So the first B is about bad. People say, oh, don't feel bad, don't cry. You would never say to somebody, oh, don't feel good. You wouldn't say to somebody who's getting married, oh, don't feel good because 50% of people end up in divorce. You just wouldn't say that. But we're happy to say to somebody, don't feel bad. And the problem with that is that the person is feeling how they're feeling, and now suddenly they're being told they shouldn't feel that way. So they'll often feel like they need to keep their feelings to themselves, or they'll have to put on a front. And then the second one is about keep busy. So keep busy might distract you from the pain for a little while, but it's not dealing with the cause of your pain. And so sometimes people will really exhaust themselves because they're keeping busy as a way of trying to feel better. But it's like a toddler. When it's crying, it needs something. And if you don't pay attention to the toddler, it will cry louder and louder until you deal with it. And it's the same with unresolved grief, that you can't just pretend it's not there. It's going to kind of, become louder and louder and have more impact until you deal with it. The R is about replace the loss. Sometimes people are quick to say, you've just lost your child. Oh, well, at least you can have another one. Or you've just lost your puppy. And they go, oh, well, on Saturday, we'll go and buy you another one. So it's not at all looking at what that relationship meant to you, how much it's impacted you. It isn't about get another thing or get another person or get another boyfriend or, oh, don't worry, there are plenty more fish in the sea. Sometimes we come out with these sorts of things because we think that replacing what we've lost somehow is the answer. And then A is for alone. Sometimes people think that the best thing to do is to grieve alone. So they'll withdraw, they'll spend time alone because they tried sharing with someone and the person said, oh, don't cry, be strong. And so they think, well, I feel like crying, but they're telling me I mustn't cry. So it's best I keep myself to myself. And that doesn't really help. And the next one is the T. Sometimes there is a myth that if you give something time, it will heal itself. But actually, imagine if you have a burst tire and you sit there by the roadside waiting for it to reflate itself. I mean, you could wait a very long time and it doesn't. It's not giving something time. It's actually what you do in that time that makes a difference. So if I have a flat tire, I know there's no point me waiting for it to reflate itself. I need to call the AA because I haven't got a clue how to change it. Some people know how to change a tire and they'll get on with it, but you need to know yourself. If you know this is beyond me, then just be quick to ask for help. You don't need to, suffer in silence. And then the last one is about strong, be strong. And sometimes people will say, oh, you've got to be strong for the family, or you've got to be strong for this one or that one. Well, that's all very well, but it doesn't mean that your grief is getting dealt with or being resolved. And that's one of the things that kept me stuck in pain for years, because instead of dealing with what was causing me with pain, I was like, oh, I mustn't cry. I've got to be strong. So those are some of the common myths that can really keep you stuck for a long time.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Ejiro.
I think I just want to maybe state one. And I just want to draw attention to mental health. When we say physical health, what comes to mind? You think about the vibrant, energetic person. Physical health, the person is like running, jumping, happy. And then when we say mental health, people's minds go to depression, suffering, pain, but it's exactly the same thing, health. And I want people to really understand that when you're taking care of your mental health, you're being at your best. You're walking towards being your best. You are walking towards being happy, being energetic. And everything that supports you to do that is you taking care of your mental health. Nothing about mental health says depression. It is poor health that is depression and being so anxious you cannot deal with with living and your functioning day to day. So I just want to say that because I think every time we hear mental health, there's this hesitation, reluctance, and all this around mental health. But it is health. It is about you being at your best. So for you, if everyone on this call just watching, I just want you to understand that mental health is about you being at your best, not the worst.
Fantastic. Now, I want to draw you to this. You know, we had a conversation, was it on Friday? And the misconception now, I'll give you an example. Sometimes, you know, when you're tired and somebody says, why don't you just go for walks? You know, because some of the therapeutic resolves on how to get yourself going mentally is, some people say go for a walk, some people say exercise. And sometimes I hate it. I don't want to go for walks. I don't want to exercise. So there's a misconception that if you exercise and go for walks or try a faith or meditate, you feel better. So then the conception that one cap fits all is actually a misconception then.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because each person is an individual, and what nurtures you and strengthens you and everything is going to be very, very different than what somebody else will find helpful. So some people really find being in nature and going for a long walk really helpful. For me, that just doesn't work. I just get exhausted and I'm thinking, oh, this is aching, that's aching. So you have to work out for yourself what is actually going to be beneficial to you in your life, age and stage, and health and well-being and culture and all those things. That it's so important not to try to grieve according to what other people say you should be doing, or to compare. Some people go, oh, I'm not crying enough. Is there something wrong with me? And I'll say, no, you're on your own individual journey. Some people say, I'm crying all the time. Am I crying too much? No, you're on your own individual, unique journey. You have to do what is right for you. And by not comparing yourself to other people, you save yourself a lot of stress. There is something you hear sometimes about the 5 stages of grief. And that is, again, another misconception. So people end up trying to contort their own individual journey into the different stages because they think that's what they're meant to feel. But the Grief Recovery Institute found that actually Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work was actually with dying, not with people who were grieving. So if you hear somebody say, oh, well, these are the stages of grief, just kind of remind them, actually, it's not a helpful model, because it starts making people think that they ought to grieve a certain way, rather than remembering that each person will grieve differently because their relationship was unique, their resources are unique, their experiences are unique. So that's another misconception that can sometimes hold you back.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And Ejiro, did you want to say something?
Yeah, no, I was just going to agree with that. I think for many of us, and again, once in crisis, we can get thrown. And that's why it's important that, and I love this saying, and I'm just going to share it, that it is in the time of peace that you prepare for war. You don't prepare for war when the war is upon you. Now that you're well, you feel good, you feel strong, is the time you're supposed to be looking for your resources, doing what works for you. Because when the crisis comes, you want to already know, you already practice what works for you. And for each of us, it is unique. It's just like me asking you, Ibinabo, do you like apples? And you say, hold on a minute, let me go check Google if I like apples. And you get like 3 gazillion answers to that. But the answer, if you like apple, is still not answered. So it is such an individual thing. You need to taste for yourself what works for you.
Thank you. So I suppose then that's why sometimes, you know, we would need therapy. And this is not to say that I'm promoting you know, I'm not advertising for you, but I'm just saying that, you know, in all of these things, right, I just feel that personally, right, there is the need to work with somebody I'll just say this now. A couple of weeks ago, I had to I had a trauma informed care specialist speak, talk about trauma informed care. And it's simple that, that we need therapy. We need therapy. And if you don't go to somebody to talk to you or to lead you or to guide you, then you may not even have the kits that you need to even just survive. So what I want to say is that this is just scratching the surface, and that if there's anyone who now says, you know what, I need to talk to you, or I need more of these, how can they contact you?
So I love what you're saying about therapy. And yes, while therapy is a fantastic service, it's not always for everyone. Okay. And it's good for us to try it out because of the uniqueness of the work. You are your own person. And imagine having somebody that would help you discover that. There's so much power in that. If you want to find me, I am with BlacktherapistsIreland. I decided on that name because I felt if somebody was looking for me and they went to Google, they would go Black Therapist in Ireland. So you would be able to find
but then also, sorry to cut you short, but somebody in Nigeria and London can also find you.
Exactly. By the time you're going Black Therapist, I hope Black Therapist pops up wherever you are in the world, and you will find amazing people on that side. It doesn't matter who you work with. See who you feel you will be able to relate with, have a conversation, and do try out therapy. Try it out. And don't be like, oh, I've tried it one person a few years ago, it didn't work, therefore it will not work. It's a lovely, lovely opportunity for you to get to know yourself.
Fantastic. And Ghulam, if anybody wants to.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I've put my details in the chat box, and maybe it can be included in the comment section. But I am also on LinkedIn. So if you were to search for Ghulam Fernandes grief recovery, you'll find me as well. I think what I was going to say is it's all about knowing yourself. There are a lot of resources out there. For some people, actually, they're grieving, but they're grieving well and they're doing fine. The important thing is especially if you've tried different things and you haven't had the results, the grief recovery method is really very specifically designed to step by step take you through the process. And not everybody is struggling with grief. Some people have resourcefulness, some people, maybe they just need a little bit of information. There's a lot of information around. But if you are feeling stuck, if you feel you've tried many things, but you're still really not able to live your life well, because ultimately our heart is to help people create a life that's well lived. And somebody said to me the other day, it's hard to do that if you're trying to drive a car, but with the handbrake on. And so unresolved grief can be the thing that's dragging you, and it's like putting the handbrake on. And your car's moving, but there is damage being done, and it's not able to do all it could or should. So I would encourage you to I myself, and I'm sure many others do as well, offer a free discovery call where we can find out what you're going through and what you need and whether this would be a good fit. If it isn't, we will signpost you to other resources or other therapies that might be more appropriate. But, don't sit on it, because life can just be frittered away, and it just doesn't have to be that way. We're created to live a life that's a blessing and blessed. And if anything's interfering with that, let's be brave and reach out.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I have one comment here. It says the description of grief and our individual responses is so insightful. And Ejiro, you were wondering, what are we going to say for 1 hour, 30 minutes? I told you when you come on EB Speaks, You will have something to say. So I just want to say thank you very much for everyone who's joined us today. And listen, I have a few glitches. My camera, everything, the gremlin happened, but then the show must go on. And listen, next week I have another very interesting conversation on avoiding later life crisis. We're going to be talking about the importance of identifying yourself. And Ghulam, thank you so much. Ejiro, and everyone else. I just want to say a huge thank you to you. And ladies, I'm going to call you. And so bye, everybody.